The train hissed into the dusty station of Dry Hollow like a wounded animal. Passengers stepped off in pairs or groups, clutching luggage, calling for cabs, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. But one woman stood alone. She wore a faded shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders and boots too large for her small feet. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained with soot. Strands of chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, damp with sweat and dust. A deep bruise bloomed along her jawline, half hidden beneath her scarf. The station master leaned out from his booth. "Name?" She blinked slowly. The question wasn't cruel, just routine. "I don't have one," she said after a pause. Her voice was low, cracked like dry earth. He frowned. "Well, everyone's got a name, miss. Not anymore." He opened his mouth to say something but stopped. There was something in her eyes, something wild, haunted. He handed her a slip of paper with a half-hearted shrug and turned to the next passenger. She wandered through the town square, clutching a small cloth bag to her chest like it held her only reason for breathing. Children stared. A merchant muttered something about loose women under his breath. At the boarding house, the owner took one look at her and slammed the door shut. By sundown, she had found a spot behind the general store where the ground was dry and shielded from wind. She curled up, using her bag as a pillow. The stars blinked overhead like distant, uncaring gods. That night, she didn't sleep. Not really. The cold bit at her bones, and the voices of drunken men in the alley kept her awake. One of them passed close and laughed. "Pretty one, that," he slurred. "Bet she'd be grateful for company." Another laughed. Footsteps approached. Her hand reached instinctively for the shard of glass she kept hidden in her boot. But then, everything went quiet. A shadow moved at the end of the alley. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, a long coat that brushed the ground. The man didn't say a word, but the drunk sobered immediately. One of them whispered, "Boone," and they both vanished like rats chased from a barn. She peeked through the cracks of her makeshift shelter. The man stood in silence, looking in her direction. Even in the darkness, she could feel the weight of his gaze. He didn't step closer, didn't offer food, didn't offer words, just watched. When she woke the next morning, the town was already buzzing with rumors. That woman, no name, no ring, probably a runaway. "I heard she came from the east where the fire happened." West and Boone looked at her. No, he wouldn't. He's not that kind of man. Maybe he just saw something familiar. She wandered through town again, trying to find work. The bakery sent her away. The tailor laughed in her face. No references, no surnames, no chance. By dusk, she returned to the alley. Her body ached. Her stomach gnawed with hunger. She leaned her head against the wall and let the tears come, silent and slow. A shadow fell over her again. She looked. Up, it was him. West and Boone. His face was unreadable. Scars lined his jaw. His eyes were like smoke. Gray, shifting, hard to hold on to. He didn't speak. He simply reached out his hand. She stared at it for a long time, and then, because she had no husband, no name, and no place to go, she took it. Silas didn't lead her through town. He led her around it, down a trail no one used, past the dry creek bed and into the foothills where the land turned harsh and silent. His horse walked slow, like it understood the woman behind the saddle hadn't eaten properly in days. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The only sound was the wind catching dry grass and the distant cry of hawks overhead. She held tight to the saddle horn, unsure if she was being rescued or taken. When they arrived, the cabin looked like it had grown out of the mountain itself. Low, weathered, half covered in climbing vines. Smoke rose from the chimney. There was no welcome sign, no lantern to greet her. Silas dismounted, tied the horse, and opened the door without a word. He glanced back once. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The inside smelled of cedar and tobacco. A stone fireplace glowed low, casting flickers of light on the wooden walls. There were two rooms, one with a cot, the other with a large, sturdy bed. Silas pointed to the cot and set a basin of water on the table. Bread and beans were already out, still warm. She moved slowly, uncertain. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He didn't answer, just turned and disappeared through the door to the other room. The next morning, she woke before the sun. A blanket, one she didn't remember pulling over herself, lay tucked beneath her chin. Outside, the sound of an axe echoed through the hills. She stepped to the window and saw him, Silas Boone, shirt damp with sweat, splitting logs with the focus of a man trying to forget something. The town didn't forget either. At the saloon, whispers spread fast. He took her up there. No, One's been in that cabin since the fire. She's trouble, mark my words. But Silas didn't care. He returned only once to the blacksmith, and when asked about the woman, he simply stared until no one dared ask again. Back at the cabin, she cleaned in silence, scrubbed the table, mended a torn curtain. She didn't owe him anything, but doing something, anything, made the silence less unbearable. That night, as she sat by the fire with a cup of weak tea, Silas finally spoke. "Eat, sleep, leave when you're strong." She looked up. His voice was deep, but quiet. She studied his face, scarred, hollow, not cruel but carved by grief. "I have nowhere to go," she said. He didn't respond, just stared at the fire, jaw tight. Outside, a storm rolled in. Wind howled through the cracks of the cabin, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel afraid. She didn't know his story and he didn't ask for hers, but something unspoken settled between them that night, like the silence was holding its breath. The next morning, the mountains were dusted with frost. She stood by the fire, cradling a chipped mug in her hands. Silas had already gone out. He always left before dawn, always returned at sundown, never explained where. She wasn't sure how many days had passed. Maybe 3, maybe 6. The rhythm of the cabin was simple. Silence, work, warmth. It was more than she'd had in months, but the silence was beginning to feel heavy. That evening she followed him, quietly, not far, just to the edge of the ridge, where he always disappeared. She kept her distance, hidden by scrub trees. From behind a rock she watched him kneel beside a crude wooden cross. 2, actually. Once he didn't pray, didn't cry, just sat there for a long time, his head bowed, shoulders stiff. The wind pulled at his coat. She stepped on a twig. His head snapped around. Their eyes met. She froze. Silas stood, walked straight to her. She braced herself. Fear spiked in her chest. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't grab her. He just said, "Don't follow me." She nodded. "I'm sorry." That night, she packed her things. A few clothes, the half-eaten loaf of bread, a piece of soap she'd found. He didn't owe her anything. She shouldn't have come, shouldn't have stayed. Before dawn, she left the cabin on foot, headed down the mountain trail alone. But the land was colder than she remembered. Her legs trembled from hunger. Her boots blistered her feet. By midday, she collapsed near a dry riverbed. The sky turned darker. She thought of her father's voice, cold and final. Her fiancé's hands too rough, too demanding. The locked room, the slap, the silence that followed her like a shadow. She had no name, no husband, no destination, and now no strength. When she opened her eyes, the sun was gone, but the stars weren't out yet. A shape loomed above her. Silas. He didn't speak. He just lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her back up the mountain. She was too tired to fight him. When they reached the cabin, he didn't set her down on the cot. He took her to the big room, to the bed. He placed her there gently, pulled the blanket over her, and left. A moment later, she heard something she hadn't heard before. A door closing softly, then another, then silence. She was alone in his room. She curled beneath the quilt and let herself cry. Not from fear, from confusion, from something she didn't know how to name. She woke to the smell of bacon. It didn't make sense. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't even seen Silas the night before after he carried her back. But now, on the wooden table by the window, there was a plate, still warm, still steaming, bread, eggs, and bacon. He was gone again. She sat on the edge of the bed, unsure if she should eat. Then her stomach made the decision for her. She finished everything. As she cleaned the plate, her eyes wandered across the room. Silas's room. She hadn't really looked before. Now she did. There was a small shelf with only 3 books. One was a worn Bible. The other 2 had no titles left on the spines. A comb, a silver pocket watch stopped at 4th, a pair of children's boots by the door, dusty but still perfectly upright. She opened the wardrobe. Inside, among the neatly folded shirts, was a pale blue dress, lace at the collar, tiny, delicate, buttons, clearly not hers, clearly not recent. Behind it, tucked into the corner, was a toy horse, wooden, hand-carved. A name was etched on the bottom, Mara. Her fingers trembled as she placed it back. Later that day, Silas returned with firewood. She waited for him to say something about the room, the breakfast, her escape. He said nothing. At dinner, she finally asked, was the blue dress hers? He didn't look up, just stirred his. She tried again. Your wife? Still nothing. Finally, he said, they burned 5 winters ago. The air in the cabin thinned. I was in town, When it started, couldn't get back fast enough. She swallowed. I'm sorry, nodded once. I couldn't leave the room, she whispered. When I ran, I had nothing. He didn't ask her to explain. Didn't need to. That night, the wind howled through the cracks again. She sat by the fire, her knees pulled up to her chest. Silas took the chair across from her. Still no words. But for the first time, he didn't retreat to the other room. He stayed, and as the fire crackled and the shadows danced, the ghosts in the house seemed to settle. Not gone, just quieter. The frost thickened as the days passed. Each morning, Silas rode out before she woke. Each evening, he returned with something. Firewood, potatoes, dried apples. He never asked where she came from, never asked her name. She didn't offer it. One morning, she woke with her hands shaking. The chill felt sharper, deeper. She felt her chest tighten, too full to breathe. When she stood, the room spun. She collapsed near the hearth. When she opened her eyes, Silas was kneeling beside her. His coat smelled of pine and smoke. She tried to speak, but only a dry croak escaped. Without a word, he lifted her in his arms and carried her back to bed. Over the next 3 days, she drifted in and out of fever. Cool cloths on her head, bitter herbs on her tongue. Strong arms holding her steady when she shivered too hard to stay still. She saw glimpses, Silas's face close to hers, eyes clouded with concern. His rough hand brushing sweat-drenched hair from her forehead, the firelight flickering on the wall, the shape of him dozing upright in the chair beside her bed. He didn't leave her, not once. When she finally awoke for good, the fever broken, she found herself beneath a different quilt. Heavier, softer, and someone had braided her hair. She turned her head. Silas sat by the window, half asleep. He looked tired, paler than usual but solid, present. You stayed, she whispered. He looked at her slow and calm. Of course I did. It wasn't affection. It wasn't obligation. It was something else. Something older, like instinct. That evening she managed to eat. Again, he placed the bowl gently in front of her and sat across the table. The candle between them flickered. Thank you, she said softly. He didn't answer, but after a pause he asked, You got a name? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not anymore. He nodded slowly. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Outside, snow began to fall, slow and soft, like ash from a long dead fire. Inside, she watched Silas's hands as he cleaned his rifle. The scar on his knuckle, the way he moved with care. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what she might feel for him if she stayed much longer. She was stronger now. Each morning, she rose before the fire died. She swept the floor, gathered water from the creek, and kneaded bread with numb fingers. Silas never asked her to do any of it, but he never stopped her either. There was rhythm now, stillness without silence, comfort without closeness, until the day she opened the chest in the barn. She hadn't meant to snoop. She was looking for extra blankets, but the lid creaked open easily, and something called her in. Inside was a faded photograph, creases at every edge. Silas stood beside a red-haired woman smiling softly. Between them, a little girl with a missing front tooth and a crooked bow. She traced the girl's face with her thumb. Underneath the photo lay a charred scrap of fabric. It might have once been part of a dress, pale blue just like the one in the wardrobe. At the bottom of the chest was a letter, half burned, its edges crumbling. Only a few words remained. Waited all night. She was coughing again. Please come home, Silas. I'm scared. Her breath caught. She closed the chest and sat in the straw, heart pounding. The past had teeth, and they were sharp. That night she didn't speak at dinner. Silas noticed. You find it? He asked. She looked up. He wasn't angry, not even guarded, just tired. I wasn't supposed to be gone that long, he said. They had smoke in their lungs by the time I got there. The doctor said too late. She blinked back, the sting behind her eyes. I'm sorry. I buried them behind the ridge, he continued. But I couldn't bury the sound. I still hear it, when I sleep, when I don't. I hear things too, she said. Her voice shook, slammed doors. My father's voice, my own name. Before they took it from me. He stared at her quiet. You didn't take me, she added. You saved me, even if you didn't mean to. The wind knocked against the windows like it wanted it. Neither of them moved, but for the first time Silas looked at her. not like someone who didn't belong, but like someone who had every right to be there. That night, as the fire burned low, she reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny wrinkled paper, a birth record, her real name, the last thing she'd taken when she ran. She looked at it for a long time, then fed it to the fire. The snow melted slowly. In Silver Bluff, spring was near, but the cold still clung to the hills. Down in town, gossip returned like thawing rivers. She's still up there, living with him like a wife. Something's not right. No decent woman would stay with Silas Boone. And then came the man in the brown coat. Sheriff Colt Ramsey hadn't walked through those streets in nearly 2 years. Not since Silas broke his brother's jaw in a saloon brawl that no one dared talk about. Now he was back, with a badge, a new star on his chest and a telegram in his pocket. It was from the capital, about a missing woman, daughter of a prominent judge, last seen boarding a westbound train, suspected runaway, possibly abducted. He recognized her the moment he saw the sketch. Ramsey took a horse and headed into the hills. She was hanging clothes in the morning light when the dog barked. Once. Then again, she turned to see a man on horseback approaching the cabin with a sheriff's star pinned to his chest. She froze. Silas stepped out from behind the barn, rifle slung across his back. His eyes were hard, unreadable. The sheriff tipped his hat. Didn't expect to see you playing house, Boone. You're not welcome here, Silas said. Ramsey ignored him, looking at her instead. Miss, you all right? She didn't answer. Name's Sheriff Ramsey. Folks down east are looking for you. Said you were taken by force. I wasn't, she said. Then why no word? No telegram, no letter. I didn't want to be found, Ramsey laughed. That's not how the law works, sweetheart. You're somebody's daughter, somebody with power, and right now you're considered missing property. She's not property, Silas growled. You think the judge cares what you say? In one smooth motion, Silas stepped between her and the sheriff. She's not going anywhere, he said low and steady. Ramsey reached for his gun. Silas didn't move. She stepped forward, voiced sharp. If you take me, I'll scream. I'll say you hurt me. I'll say anything. I'd rather die in this cabin than go back. Ramsey narrowed his eyes. You're making a mistake. She met his stare. I already made one, when I let people decide my life for me. Silence. Then Ramsey turned his horse. You'll regret this, he muttered. They watched him ride away until he was gone from sight. Only then did Silas lower his shoulders. She touched his arm just once and he let her. The sheriff didn't take defeat kindly. 2 nights later, the sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Silas was already at the door, rifle in hand. She moved to his side, heart pounding. Outside, 3 men dismounted. Ramsey was among them, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. I gave you a chance, Boone, he shouted. This time I'm not asking. Silas didn't answer. He just moved to the front porch, calm as I. She's not yours, Ramsey growled. You're harboring stolen blood. She belongs to no one, Silas said. Not even me. Behind Silas, she grabbed the shotgun hanging by the hearth. Her hands shook. Her breath came fast, but her mind was clear. The last time someone came to take her, she'd stayed silent. Not now. The first shot rang out like thunder. One of the deputies fell, clutching his leg. Gunfire exploded in the dark. Silas moved with terrifying precision, firing, reloading, shifting position. Ramsey dove behind the water trough. The third man tried to flank the cabin, but was stopped cold by a slug to the shoulder. Then everything went still. Smoke hung low. The porch rail was splintered. The dog whimpered from under the stairs. Silas stepped forward, boots crunching, over broken glass. Ramsey raised both hands. All right. She stood behind Silas, still holding the shotgun. Go, Silas said. Ramsey hesitated. This isn't over. It is for you. The sheriff mounted his horse with a sneer and disappeared into the trees. Inside, she dropped the shotgun. Her hands were numb. Silas turned to her. You okay? She nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was true. I'll fix the door, he said. I'll make tea, she replied. Neither of them smiled, but something shifted, like a wound that finally stopped bleeding. That night, Silas cleaned his wounds at the table while she sewed the rip in his sleeve. When her fingers brushed his arm, he didn't flinch. You could have let me go, she whispered. I didn't want to, he said. She looked up. I didn't want to either, she replied. And for the first time, he reached for her hand. Not with possession, not with apology, but with quiet promise. The cabin healed slowly. Silas rebuilt the porch rail with fresh cedar from the ridge. She planted herbs beneath the kitchen window. Basil, thyme, a little lavender she'd saved from her old bag. He didn't ask why. He just brought her more seeds. Some days he spoke a few words, fewer than most men used in an hour, but every one of them mattered. She came to know the shape of his silence, what it meant when he looked at the sky, or when he stood too long at the edge of the field. He still visited the graves, always alone. She never followed again. But one afternoon, he came back carrying something wrapped in canvas. She opened it carefully. It was a carved sign, simple and rough. Home, just that. Not Boone Ranch, not the cabin, not Mara's Rest, just home. She helped him hang it above the door. That evening they ate together by lamplight. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his knuckles. "I want to stay," she said. He looked up. "You already have." Still, a shadow lingered in her heart. One final piece. Late one night, when he was asleep in the chair by the fire, she stepped outside with a single envelope in hand, the last thing that tied her to the world she left behind. She walked to the edge of the ridge, where the wind still carried voices. If you listened hard enough, she held the envelope over the flame of her lantern until it caught. She didn't watch it burn. She looked up at the sky, wide and quiet and free. By spring, the hills bloomed wild with color. The dog followed her everywhere now, tail wagging with each step. Silas built a second chicken coop. She painted the bedroom window blue. One morning she found a new pair of boots by the door, small, worn in just enough. A note tucked inside, "For the one who walks beside me, no signature." She slipped them on. They fit perfectly. The creek sang louder in spring. Birds returned to the trees above the ridge. The lavender she planted pushed up through the soil, small but stubborn. She knelt in the garden one morning, hands deep in the earth, when she heard Silas's boots behind her. He didn't speak. He simply sat on the step, watching her work with the calm of someone who'd finally stopped running from ghosts. She looked up. "Do you ever wonder what people say about us down there?" He shrugged. "They don't know us." She smiled. "No, they don't." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills gold, she pulled out a piece of parchment. She wrote, for the first time in months. Not a letter, not a confession, a story. There was a woman with no husband, no name and no place to go. She was supposed to disappear. She was supposed to stay silent. But then a man who said nothing and lost everything made space for her pain. Not with flowers, not with promises, but with room to breathe, with stillness, with staying. She left the story folded on the windowsill, under a small stone. The next day it was gone, but a note was left in its place. "Stay as long as you want." Some months later, a traveler passed through Dry Hollow. He told a story at the saloon about a cabin in the hills where a feared man lived with a woman no one remembered. A place with no gate, no name, just two people who looked at each other like they'd come back from the dead. In a world quick to judge, quick to label, and quicker to discard, she found a place where silence wasn't punishment, but peace, where her name wasn't something she needed to defend, but something she got to choose again. And maybe that's what we all want in the end. Not rescue, not revenge, just a quiet place to be seen, and the one person who won't look away. Tell me, if you had no name, no past, no promises left to chase, where would you go and who would you hope to find waiting at the end of the road? Share your reflections in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for more stories where love rises from the ashes.